and this is before Spark, and I was talking about this at various conferences and whatnot, that exercise promoted our brains to be better at learning. I wouldn't have seen it if I didn't believe it. Now think about that. If you have to have the belief to be able to see what's in front of you, or else you won't be able to construct it. Pursuant to that, a study came out yesterday where they did canvassing of people's loneliness, and post-COVID, it is mushroomed. We're much more lonely than before. We had sort of suspected it. We saw it in animals in the 1990s, especially in birds who had a need to come up with new songs every year, and seeing their brains grow differently. They grew more cells for more songs.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com, and when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes. Hi there, I'm Sifu Slim, and I am an author and an interviewer and a researcher on health and wellness. My mainstay is the physical activity. Some people call it exercise. I try to use the word physical movement and physical activity so it connects us more to our ancestors who weren't going to the gym, like Jack LaLanne, who's a person I met in my life in 1995. And he gave me his blessing, and I'm still continuing on with a lot of stuff I learned from him and other great masters. And today I've got the chance to speak with someone who spent a lot of time in the medical and the educational side of things, who's written a lot of books, and he's written articles as well for scientists, books for the general public with lots of science into it. And without further ado, I'm going to bring in John Ratey. Say hello, John.
Hi, Sifu. How are you? I'm glad to be with you. I'm excited to talk with you. Getting to know you is wonderful. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about stuff that we both love and are very passionate about. That is keeping ourselves well.
So the first time that I heard mind, body, and spirit was probably in something along the lines of a special message from somebody when I was 10 years old, reading a quote, hearing something on a spiritual side of things, mind, body, and spirit. And my father, who went to camp in New Jersey, I'm not too far from you. I'm in Clinton, New Jersey, and that's not too far from Easton, Pennsylvania. So we grew up in the frozen tundra of the football fields, getting slammed into the tundra by our people, our competitors on the football field, probably very similar backgrounds. But this mind, body, spirit thing, I didn't know what that was all about when I was 10 years old. And then eventually, when you start to put what is life all about, what is the human physiology and functionality and how we walk through this life, mind, body, and spirit. And then I threw in karma, and there's lots of other things you can throw in there. It started to make sense to me, but it probably wasn't until almost into middle age where I started to figure that out. If you could share with me what the progression of you and your life of putting those three words together was and how that evolved.
Well, I grew up playing through four sports and ended up playing a lot of tennis. And it was interesting because me and my partner both were from blue collar families, and playing tennis at that time was all about country clubs and having tennis pros and tennis lessons and all that. We didn't, but we were football players and in a very competitive district, and basketball players and all that. So we were very competitive and never say die and never lose. So we made it to the nationals, and he went on to become a tennis pro, teaching pro after he went to Vietnam. And now in his 70s is a pickleball pro. You know, he's one of the leading lights in the 70 and older pickleball groups. But anyway, so I got my fill with the exercise and sport growing up. Just that was part of my life, always moving, always active. And then, but I was also intrigued with the mind, intrigued with what we knew about ourselves. And so when I went to college, I went specifically to become a philosophy major. And this is really weird, given where I grew up, where it was all steel mills all the time. And that's what you're supposed to be, an engineer if you were smart. But I wanted to learn more about the world and myself. So I became a philosophy major. And then through that, you get into the spiritual, certainly. I ended up living as a Zen monk for a month with one of the first Zen masters to come to the United States to bring the Zen message here, and became very involved with that. But so I had this combination of things, and then got interested in psychiatry and psychology, and started my career there in Boston after college. Went there and essentially been there ever since, or working with patients, working to understand how we think about things, and how best to help people manage their lives.
So that it all clicked in when you continued your studies and got into medical school, and you put the psychology and the psychiatry together with human movement and sedentary behavior and sleep disorders and all these things, and then you started to connect all those dots.
Yeah, no, I was always sleep. I mean, I was spent 3 years during my residency with the preeminent sleep researcher in the world, and at his lab, and very aware of more looking at the biology of sleep and what sleep really was, but also being very cognizant of how important it was for us to sleep, but always being very aware of movement and how important it was to all of us. And it was important to me. I played basketball in intramural teams in medical school, and that was a break from the grind. But I didn't see it as a grind. I went in and I was very committed to what I was going to do, and that was to learn as much as I could about the personality. But then I was focused on learning all I could about the brain, and with that sort of stayed true to my pursuit of trying to understand how we think, how we react, how we respond to the world.
So I'm going to hold up a bottle here. It's melatonin from Trader Joe's Market. And, you know, a lot of people look at pills and they hear, oh, helps me sleep, and they take it. They think it's a sedative or whatever. And then, years ago, I read that the idea behind melatonin is it's not a sleep enhancer like a knockout drop would be, but it's more of a resetter of our circadian rhythms or something along the lines of our sleep reset button and setting us up for sleep. Those are the things, the little bit I know about melatonin. I don't know what your thoughts are on taking over-the-counter melatonin supplement a half an hour or an hour before one goes to sleep, but not using it. I don't use it daily, but I might use it if I feel I'm a little wound up, but I don't know if it's more of a placebo or if it has actual science behind it.
Oh, it does have science and it does have practical usage, but again, it's something not to be used on a daily basis. And what you get over the counter usually is a lot more melatonin than we need. A lot more milligrams than we need. I mean, they 5 to 10 to 15 milligrams of melatonin.
Let me see what
really
this is a 3 milligram.
There you go. And even that is above what we really need to really turn the tide of basically what it does. My own experience with melatonin is that it confuses your thinking a little bit. If you're too focused on, if you're too trapped in your default mode network, we call it now, and you can't get out of it to shut your brain up. This, by adding a little bit of confusion to it, it gets you into the point where you can just fall asleep.
Okay, so I'm going to if I took the 3 milligrams and I chopped it in half, would that be a good idea?
It would be, yes.
Okay.
Yes. See if that helps. It should help just as much.
You're my first appointment with a Harvard trained and Harvard employed medical doctor. You're my first appointment with a psychiatrist, so thank you for that. I guess that's a good sign. I don't know how many people go to see a psychiatrist for prevention, but I tell people about, psychological therapy, counseling, and life coaching on a maintenance, on a building, on a coaching type of level before you have a crisis. Not a lot of people take me up on that because it might have a budget and a time issue for them, and it also has the impact for people on my age. If you went to a counselor back in the 70s, people thought you had some stability issues of mind and body and behavior. So, but now it's more accepted, but it's still you would hope to see more along the lines of prevention and maintenance than we do see. Would you agree with that?
Oh my God, I think that's it's been my life just to try to get prevention into the world. You mentioned being sedentary. That's sort of that's what my enemy is people being sedentary and not moving in schools, in work, and in their lives. I mean, especially given what we're coming out of in terms of the COVID business and the lockdown and people living on Zoom, which is great, by the way. It's great, but and allows me to be a digital nomad. So I'm talking to you from Hawaii, but I could be from Korea, or it could be from California or from Boston, wherever. I'm on with you. So that's all well and good, but it puts you in the chair. And or if you have a standing desk, maybe, and I have one fellow that has a treadmill under his desk and is on it on Zoom all the time. And so he's moving at about a mile and a half an hour. So he's up and moving. Used to talk about that a lot, the moving desk, that various people came up with when I started in the mid 2000s. They started doing that up at the Mayo Clinic. Yeah.
I get a kick out of protocol. So I've worked at organizations and companies before that we had a certain dress code. And I thought that was really funny that you could weigh
200 pounds more than your proper weight, or you could have really horrible posture by choice. But if you dressed with the current protocol requirements from your company or your organization, they wouldn't have any problems with how you looked. Maybe you could have blue hair even, which has been common lately, the different hair colors that people, men and women, and other people who don't consider them men and women, use. So I don't know what to do with that. I mean, does that sound like what is that? I didn't even know the proper word to use to describe that anomaly. It just doesn't make sense to me that you would uphold dress codes, but not posture and being close to your proper weight, and even your gait. You could have a really horrible gait, but nobody says anything when you're 10 years old. So now you have that improper gait for the rest of your life.
Yeah, there's so much in that, and we miss the important things in living, and oftentimes, and we're driven by the herd, whatever's current, whatever is and now it's TikTok, and it's all that stuff it's really captured our, not just our youth, but a lot of people in the world, in terms of doing these stupid videos, for 30 seconds, and that, and people being influencers because they have a big list of people who are showing up to hear them, watch them, whatever, and be guided.
Did you want to finish something?
No, that's it.
Okay. So what I thought we could do now is I'll mention what propelled me to think I had something to say in order to write my first book, Sedentary Nation. And then I'll ask you the same thing of why you wrote your first book on wellness. And then we could talk about Spark a little bit, which is the book that I've read, which I got a lot out of. But I've been a Jack LaLanne devotee, martial arts devotee, and then pursuing intellectual advancement my entire life. Written a fair number of books in fiction, and now 3 in nonfiction. And the ones in nonfiction are, of course, were a lot more research, and you had to get everything right. And then in the middle of editing, as you know, you could have a piece of the science that you read. There was a big study done maybe 2 years before you wrote your book, and now there's a new piece of science. How do you have to go back into your nonfiction book and edit the new science in? Go back to the editor, say, does this sound right the way I'm saying it? It's just an ongoing thing, and you wish you could have like a book that was alive and on the internet, so you could walk in and edit it, 10 years later, 20 years later, without having to do this whole release of a new book. Does that make sense to you?
Sure, and that's what blogs are today, right? Continuous blogging, where you add to, take away from, and I think probably there are books like that now that you can get that are digital, and to be changed, to be edited, to be updated, periodically. And I think that's certainly what we do, you being in one side of it, but what we do with when more evidence creeps in, we have to pay attention to it. And especially something like, I mean, and I've been so immersed in what's called exercise, but movement, and the effect on the brain, and it changes, but not radically, I must say. We sort of have known this stuff. In Spark, I talk about the first medical textbook written by Hippocrates, 300 BC.
Yeah.
He talked about movement as a way to treat mood disorders, depression, anxiety. He would tell people to go out and walk and keep moving and get up off their butts. And he lived that too, by the way. He was one of the early Greeks were always moving. Their gymnasiums were the places where they learned and taught, but they were often walking. it was while they were doing it, like some of the early scripture people, like Saint Ignatius Loyola, who had his students moving with him all the time, because that's what he felt was the best way to teach and the best way to learn and the best way to think.
Yeah, teachers and masters and having their devotees and students move with them, I think is a great way to do it. And I think when I was a high school teacher, I thought that if I could get these kids, many of them were sedentary kids, sometimes they were inner city kids, if I could get them out in nature and have them treat me with respect. So the thing I like about yoga centers and martial arts centers is when you walk in there, you could be a VIP, you could be an arrogant person, you could be whatever. When you walk in there, you turn over your mind, body, and spirit and your attention to that yoga teacher, to that master. It's a kind of an understood thing. And I wish we had that in school, because most teachers I know worked really hard and deserved to have people be attentive and respectful of their time and not, run away and cause trouble and then get the teacher fired, these types of things. And I think that would be so wonderful if we could have more of a moving classroom where unfortunately in a lot of the high schools, we have 33, 35 students, but we have a little bit of a hierarchy of some of the kids who can maintain and help maintain that group of 30 plus kids. But then we could do a little bit more roaming and everybody would be safe and as attentive as they could be. They don't have to be attentive 100% of the time, but at the crucial times and the safety times, and not, messing around with the other kids, messing the other kids up in that environment. I think that would be a great way we could learn. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it'd be wonderful to have those kinds of classrooms. I'll tell you, just to, all of our work in the schools is all about that, is introducing activity, movement throughout the day, if possible. And that's what you're talking about, although you're talking about the actual classroom moving, which would be great to be doing that. The evidence is pretty clear that when we move, we are more creative. It may not be the best, moving might not be the best to really lock in new information, memory, while you're moving may not be the best. It may be right after you're moving that your brain is more ready. But while you're moving, a study out of Stanford some years ago now showed that when you're moving, you are more creative than even after you're moving, and certainly before you're moving. They did 3 different situations, and they were surprised. They thought it was going to be after you were done moving that you were going to be the most creative. Well, you were much more creative than when you came in and you were sedentary. That afterwards, your brain was more supple. But while you were moving was the most supple, if you will, the most able to switch sets, which is a huge part of being creative.
Yeah, I guess, John, what I should preface that with, it would be more like a classroom where you have different blocks where you could move, and the teacher, the master person teaching, is walking with the student, so there's some activity of movement, and then you get to this new area where there's a little bit of a spark, like your book is titled, and then you get to this area and you sit or you stand in that area. And then after a certain amount of time, what I learned from being in the high school situation is that after about 20 minutes of a lecture, and it might even be 10 now, I was doing this 10 years ago, that the mind turns off. And for people I know who are tour guides and do those things that used to be called elder hostels, now it's called Rhodes Scholar trips for people that have enough money to go on a trip and go on a wine tour or go to Oxford and learn about some portion of English history. And so even seniors and adults, it's that same statistic. There's the attention span for the sermon at church or something that you're trying to learn is not very long. You might have the numbers and more currently than I do for modern humanites.
Well, yes, I'm not sure what the number is, but that's why you need to spice it up with movement. And one teacher, fifth grade teacher up in Wyoming, was voted Teacher of the Year. And what he did in his class in fifth grade is sort of the nexus for trouble, entering or almost entering adolescence. Big movement or a big problem with keeping your attention focused. But he would have 15 minutes of seat time and then a minute or two of dance or exercise in each of his classes. So they would get the movement there, and the kids loved it. They wanted to come to school. They wanted to go to his class. They thought it was not just fun and odd. It was odd, but it really led his students to do very, very well. And he was, there were a TV program about him and all, the usual, oh my God, look what's happening here. And it really works. Of course, no one else did it. And I'm sure that hasn't continued because he's probably moved on to some other situation. But those are the kinds of things that have been done. Yeah.
So I'll bring you up to speed, John, on Sedentary Nation. So after having some writing ability, advancing my skills there, and then being a devotee of Jacqueline and martial arts and many other sports, I determined that my main sport is really fitness. That's the one I do every day. It's my default setting. It's the one I'm the most proficient at. I think it would be hard on my body and my mind to play football every day, even if I was 18 or 22. Fitness, I could do different parts of the body, different modalities of fitness training, sometimes more long distance runs, sometimes sprints, sometimes hill workouts, and all the Jacqueline calisthenics, and then the machines, the martial arts, the crawling, military training, yoga, Pilates, all these things I worked into it. I love all of them, but I realized that I had to get a balance of what I'm going to do, because when you're 28, you're starting to realize that, hey, life's going to be long if I'm healthy and I can sustain my mind, body, spirit, my income, etc. What am I going to put together that's a plan that will last? I mean, you don't want to learn how to floss your teeth differently every year. You got to put some program together. So, you floss before you go to bed. You swish out. I use sodium bicarbonate after I'm done flossing and brushing. It's not good to brush with the abrasive material in baking soda. So I just rinse out with that, and that system seems to work pretty well. And so I said, what am I going to do for my body to make something that's really varied, very functional, and it gives me enough of the hard stuff, enough of the flexibility, enough of the balance, enough of the strength, enough of the musculature, structural things, plyometrics, all this stuff. And so I put this program together that works. And when I teach it to other people, I say, in 2 weeks, if you do the right program, you're going to be better at your program than I am at your program. Tell me what you think about that modality.
Well, it's sort of exhausting to hear what you do. I think it's great. I think you're right. It is so individual what we need to be doing, and not quite. I mean, you need a commonality to sort of begin with, and as part of everyone's day. Like, for instance, being in Hawaii here, we go to bed very early and we wake up very early, and I walked a mile and a half to get my coffee and walk back every morning at about 5. And then that starts my day, and I was ready for you. Like, now it's it's almost 8 a.m. right now, but we started at 7, and I was already up for 3 hours because we went to bed at 8 o'clock because the sun goes down and it's we're inside, so why not sleep and avoid the horrible news that is afoot in the U.S. and the rest of the world. My God, but yeah, so that's everybody's different and every situation is different, and that's what you're talking about. But yes, if you have a program that works for you, other people can take a piece of it and try to emulate you or follow you, but they'll take a piece of it and develop it into their own, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And, not everyone is wired for wellness. And so when I interviewed a water polo coach at UC Santa Barbara, who was, I think he has the record for being on the most Olympic water polo teams. So he had a long career. And I asked him, and he's very much like Mr. Spock on Star Trek. He's a highly intelligent person, great athlete, but he's very focused and boils everything down to, short sentences, and he's a doer more than I think I'm a doer in some respects, but I'm a really analytical, reflective person. I want to think, what was the genesis of this thought and what is its impact? Whereas he's a very results-oriented person and peels the onion back very quickly to get to the core. And I said, what should I tell people about this whole fitness march and this wellness lifestyle? How can I boil that down? And he said, it's very simple. He said, you're going to have 3 main focus points in life, just 3. If one of them is not wellness, you're not a wellness person. So you could take that, you could analyze it, you could say maybe there's 5 main things, but I think his message is really clear. If it's not one of your 3 main things, you're not going to be a wellness person, and you're going to be the person who may wish to get in shape for their wedding, or may have a heart attack and then has to get on some type of a walking program. So you're more of a reactive behavior, if that's the proper word, psychologically speaking.
Yeah. Everyone, it goes back to the theme that everybody's going to take whatever they can take and use it their way, and whether or not but planning wellness as part of your life, I think is really the whole best advice to give people and for people to adopt. Because if you don't, then you're gonna run out. You're gonna start eroding rather than building, and that we know that from physiology, from the brain. If we stop using our brains, they erode. I spent my life sort of studying the brain and trying to understand it and trying to make the best advice to preserve it and keep it going, as well as guiding it so that it works the best for you or for us.
That's when people ask me why I do all this training, they'll see me out at a park or at the beach or on a trail, and I'm doing exercises that they haven't seen before, perhaps, things that have like a push-up that has a leg come up, so there's a functional training aspect of it. And it looks hard, but to me, even though I'm not a big, strong athlete, I've been doing them long enough and I've never stopped that it's just part of my movement pattern, like a Spider-Man push-up or a yoga type push-up. And they'll say, why are you doing all this stuff? And I said, the main reason I do it is because of my mind.
Yeah, no, that was the impetus to write Spark. I spent many years trying to understand the brain and how it works and writing about it. I wrote a book in the 90s called A User's Guide to the Brain, and that's after a bunch of books on ADHD and on other forms of unwellness, and one's called shadow syndromes, about mild forms of mental problems or psychiatric problems that we all have, we all share. And but user's guide was how the brain really works, and works, and what we could know about how to make it work best. And that's where very important chapter in all the books that I've written is about using movement, wellness, you might say, but using exercise as a starting point for so much that we do to make ourselves the well as we can be.
How would our conversations with our significant other that are a little bit more contentious be if we both did a physical movement program, went on a hike, did an exercise program, or went on a horseback ride before we had that pivotal conversation, which if we just sat in our house and stared at each other, could be a little bit more of a violent communication pattern than otherwise.
Yeah, well, no, you know, when you do move, you change the whole chemistry and electrical issues in your brain. Everything's different when you move and after you move, so that you're more likely to have the right neurochemistry to address a contentious issue. So that and we see this in the schools, and using a broad brush, right? If we have the kids exercise in the morning when they come into school for even 30 minutes, pretty good exercise, moving around, intense, fun, captivating, we see a big drop in problems with their managing their participation, managing, you know, they're not sent to the principal because they're out of line. They're much more not compliant, but much more cooperative, much more involved, and they're much more present because we've changed their chemistry, or they have changed their chemistry, not we have, but they've changed their chemistry in their brains, and so they're calmer, and they're much less likely to go into the aggressive side of things. You know, I started in psychiatry working with aggression, and it led into attention deficit disorder and all that. But you know, you can manage aggression with medicine, with meditation, with exercise. You know, and exercise really does do a job in helping us be less reactive in an impulsive kind of way to whatever comes from the environment or from internally, so that we have a better control over our own responses, over our own, and by the responses, not just physical responses, but emotional responses. We know, for instance, if you are trained, if somebody does a third of what you do during the day, you're going to see they are going to see that they are in much better control over their impulses, and they're much less likely to get stressed, because the business of being too over responsive is that they don't put the brakes on, and putting the brakes on is so important when we're talking about having a contentious moment, being you know, in an argument, or being in a discussion where things are likely to get out of control.
Really important things to hear, John. When you were speaking about that, I popped into my head the play Oklahoma. So in a agrarian society and a ranching society in the 1800s, I thought about the idea of the farmer and Mrs. Farmer, and then the kids, and then any other aunts, uncles, and grandparents who lived there or adopted people. So they're in this thing, and if the farm is flourishing, or they're making that attempt to help that farm flourish, they've got to, with a bucket of peaches and a chicken that they're bringing over to a rooster to mate with the other chickens, doing this physical work and seeing the bounty that this is going to provide, and then the teamwork and the esprit de corps, and then the beautiful part of the fields and the trees, etc. I can't imagine when the intentions are there to thrive, or if it's indeed thriving, I can't imagine there not being a sparkle in the eye and a dynamic connection between those people, where you're going to get this open heart, open-minded, and serotonin and dopamine, all this wonderful biochemistry as a result. Does that sound accurate?
Oh yeah, and don't forget there's another hormone that plays an important role that we're paying more attention to these days, and that's oxytocin, which is the love hormone or the bonding hormone. And that situation where there's a shared goal, and they're outside and they're moving and they're having the challenges, but it's shared together, their oxytocin level is very high. And that means that they will interpret reality very differently. They will see, have a much more altruistic appreciation of everything coming in to their, sensorily, where they're at in life will be seen very differently as part of the human community. Or, one of the things that I've learned so much in the past 20 years about wellness, exercise is so important, so important. It's a center, one of the major levers of wellness. But the most important lever is connection, is being connected to one another, being connected to a program, being connected to something outside yourself, if you will, but also the regular connections that we have with each other, that is so important. And that is the stuff of life, but that really keeps us going.
Yeah, and with that, you can honor the passing of a person and your own passing. If you happen to know it's before your time, that you have a certain amount of time left. If you've given that your best effort and that human connection, and you've built a sphere of people who share common things and some love and some great memories with you, it makes that whole passage from here to wherever the next point is a different experience than dying of loneliness and living in your one-bedroom apartment somewhere and not being connected to the community or family or friends. It's something, I think that's such a new thing. One of the things I put in my book, Sedentary Nation, which I released in 2012, I believe, is that this is the time in the history of known humanity where more people have lived alone.
Yeah, just and pursuant to that, a study came out yesterday where they did a canvassing of people's loneliness, and post-COVID, it is mushroomed. We're much more lonely than before, and especially in the United States, and especially the boys. The boys and the young men are much more alone than before. And this relates to their relationship or lack thereof with another person, but also with women and as well. And so that much more, there are many more single men around. And this is a huge problem because we need that kind of connection to really make life worthwhile. And yeah, we have at Zoom and we have games and all that, but there's nothing like the interaction with another being.
We help others, they help us, and together we have that kinship and the biochemical transfer of the handshake, the hug, the helping each other out. It's, you know, I started to think, you know, having grown up in a household that wasn't extreme religion, but it was church attending religion, and it was thinking that the Bible was a true part of history. I started to think differently about some of that as I advanced intellectually, and we'll find out if I'm right or if I'm not correct. But one of the things that I said when I started studying biochemistry and neurology is that biochemistry trumps everything. When a female unleashes violent behavior on whoever's there, if it happens to be a man, let's say it's me, on a monthly level, that's a biochemical thing that's going on, like right at the beginning of the cycle. And you know more about that than I do. I haven't looked into that recently, and I'm thankfully I haven't had to, but I've been in relationships where that happened monthly, and they became like a werewolf at that time of the month. So I started to think, okay, yeah, we have yoga, we have religion, we have small groups, we have AA, we have all kinds of organizations. But I said, when it gets right down to it, biology and biochemistry trumps all of that, because that's the stuff that makes us happy, sad, aggressive, distant, whatever other adjective you throw in there. I think that's the stuff we should be studying more than religion.
Well, it's certainly, it's one of the components, absolutely. You know, and you know, but with the connection, you can begin to help deal with your own biology, and that's the point, is not to be just driven by it, but to become the master of it, much like your martial arts training. I mean, that's all about you mastering your own world first, and then the world outside of you. But so much of why I'm such a fan of the martial arts, and have been for so long. This is one of the many great things that I've been able to learn and participate in. I did a conference back in the 90s, early 90s, of schools that were dealing with kids that were thrown out of everything, kids that were unmanageable. They went to these schools out west, usually in Colorado and Utah and Montana, Wyoming, and they were the schools they went to, and this was all natural history. A big part of their curriculum was the martial arts, and you'd think, what were they doing? Giving these kids who were future criminals, maybe, the tools to be more successful in being violent and aggressive. Well, the whole point was that if you had a good dojo and a good sensei to really lead you, it was all about controlling themselves. That was the whole point. It wasn't controlling the other person, but first you had to really manage your own sense of who you were. And then that led you to become a better martial artist, or better in whatever thing you were pursuing. So it was like, what? They were teaching these kids karate? No, they were teaching them to be mindful and to be in control of themselves, and also to respect themselves and the other. And it was really a wake-up call for me, but one thing I've never forgot.
I thank you for sharing that, John. I think when you shared, the point that I need to consider about being self-aware and master of self, I think I'll rewrite my sentence this way. If you are not self-aware and you are not a master of self, then biochemistry can trump everything else.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you
And
have a, go ahead.
and you use others to help you attain that kind of mastery. That's the point.
You can't do it alone. Our our contemporary, Bruce Lee, always had someone around. And if he didn't have someone around, he was reading a book by someone who had some really deep thoughts that he might have written a book 500 years ago, on Zen or on war, Zen and the art of war, those types of things. So he was always learning from others. So he became this incredible master. And what I wrote in one of my books is that he really advanced his skills in philosophy as high as anything that he ever did. If you want to, we in the West tend to go, we put things on a level almost like a graph. But people talk about his martial arts skills, his movement skills, his film and acting skills. He was really a philosopher who would go out, and if he had lunch with Dr. John Ratey, he would spend an hour and a half with you, and then he would go to his car and he would write 15 pages about the things that he learned from you and the things he wanted to read up on. And if you gave him his book, he would spend 2 or 3 weeks on that and take another 30 pages of notes. So when he passed away, he had 10,000 pages of notes in his library. He was only 32, and he was a full-time teacher, father, husband, film director, film funding source seeking person, just an amazingly active and productive person. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on Bruce Lee before we jump to the next one.
Well, but Bruce Lee sounds a lot like Emerson. That's what Emerson did, and he, in a way, Emerson was the ultimate user of other people's thoughts, because he wrote down everything that they said or that occurred to him while he was dealing with them, and engaged with them or reading them, and he would write it in his notes. So he had incredible notebooks, and this propelled him then to his philosophy and his writing and all that, that we so revere these days.
You and your bio, John, because you've written scientific articles, papers, and books for the general release, you had to get facts and evidence. If you didn't do it in your own lab, you had to get it from other people. So you're probably, as I am, similar to Emerson in gleaning off of the better nuggets and gems of wisdom that we could along our path of advancing in our philosophy.
Absolutely. That's why I studied philosophy and religion in college, and and that's my background, and that's what I've used, and unabashed plagiarist. It's not maybe using the exact words, but certainly building on the shoulders of others, standing on their shoulders and going to a new height.
Have you interfaced with Daniel Lieberman at at Harvard?
Yes, I've been in his lab, and we talked a lot. I spoke for his course way back when. Yeah, I certainly have.
So I did get an email from him, and I had sent him one because I purposely didn't want to read his book on the brain or the human body while I was writing my book, Sedentary Nation, because we're delving into a lot of the same things. So I put that out of my reading zone. But when I finished my book after many years of reading and writing and researching, I put it online, and then I read his book, and I said, oh my gosh, we're about the same age. He's a famous teacher and scientist at Harvard. And I'm not. I said, people are going to think that I plagiarized him because our books had so many things in common. So I sent him an email and he said, no, he said, don't worry about it. He said, this stuff happens all the time. People get on a wavelength. We read similar things. We have similar thoughts and we're in a similar time period. So he said, I'll be happy to read your book and thank you for sharing that email. So I'm glad he responded to me.
Yeah, no, yeah. We were writing a second book called Go Wild, which is, and we wanted to interview him, and my co-author tried to interview him, and he went to talk to him, and he was not giving anything away. He said, "I don't want it, the same stuff to show up all over the place." So
I got it.
But anyway, yeah, no, he's done quite a lot in our field.
The barefoot professor who runs most of the year in barefoot, even in sub 40-degree weather.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Well, if you have a few more minutes to touch on our books.
Sure.
Okay. So you heard my bio in a macro level, and I said, okay, if I'm gonna, I can put out some fitness DVDs, I can put out my thoughts about lifestyle, but if I write a book, I don't want to write another workout book. There's been countless books out there. Oprah's personal trainer's written 4 or 5 books, and he's just one of 1,000. And now the number is probably 1 million people because of Amazon and the internet. So I said, what am I going to do? So this is back in 2008. And I've been thinking about wellness and many different parts of wellness for many moons, and grew up with that as my main interest in life was wellness, mind, body, and spirit. And so I said, what am I going to do? So well before I started thinking about writing a book, I had been asking psychologists, what is the main reason people are coming to see you? And I started doing that in the 90s. And if I ask you that question, thinking back to the 90s and the early 2000s, what do you think of an MFT? What was the main driver that was sending people to go see those professionals?
Well, I think discontent with their lives, as well as not being able to be the master of their responses to life situation, whether it's mood or anxiety or they're being able to manage their attention. That was a big part of my life. Is sort of coming into awareness that attention was so crucial and for our lives and for managing our lives. And so my partner and I have written 4 books on attention deficit disorder, and we know so many ways of making attention better. And one of the key ones is exercise, is movement, is keeping our movement there, because it helps manage our attention. It turns our brains on that help us stay attentive, stay with it, and not flitter off and not get so distracted, as we're living in the age of distraction, right? I mean, it's amazing. And so rather than being driven by it, you can learn to drive it.
Those are, if we had the Family Feud list of the common reasons for something, those would be high on that list of propelling people to go see a psychologist. What more than I probably polled in that time over the next 20 years, probably 200 people, and the reason that kept coming out was sleep disorders. So in the 90s and the 2000s, you have high stress, you have bodies that are not getting worn out or used. So there's no huffing and puffing, there's no fatiguing the body. There's plenty of fatiguing the mind, because you sit in a sedentary workplace, you fatigue the mind, or you put stressors on us of computer production. There's a lot of things that'll fatigue the mind, but things weren't fatiguing the body. And I believe, and you can tell me if this is correct, that you really have to fatigue the body to get the right setting so that at 8 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock or whenever you hit the sack, that you're feeling that. So your biochemistry is affected by that release that you've had and that fatigue that you've had from using your body. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. There's a lot of evidence to show that when we really use our body, when you exercise at a high level, that the kind of sleep you get will be what's called restorative sleep, stage 4 sleep, where it's not dreaming, it's certainly not restless sleep, but it's very deep sleep that helps us repair and restore and helps us regrow our bodies as well as our brains. So, and if there's one thing that we all want, we want more of that. And as we age, we have less of that, which is a big problem. So the more that we follow a prescription that you've given about exercising at a high level, the more likely we're going to get the kind of sleep we need and desire.
So with that, I wrote that book and I said, okay, my first website was maintenanceworkout.com. And in 2008, in my opinion, it should not have been available in a .com. Maintenance workout seems so basic to me, but most of the workouts on the market I found were transformational in base. Lose weight, get ripped quick. Those were the ones that encompassed more than 90% of the marketplace. There were nothing out there that I found that was based on maintenance. So I came at this subject with the idea of, okay, you've done the transformation, you've got your posture, you've got your heart health or your brain health, you've lost the pounds, now how do we get this to a sustainable level? So now you've got the maintenance workout. So that's the first thing that I pitched to the market. How do you think that was received by the market?
Not very well. No one wants to hear about that. They want the quick fix. They want to. Their goal is to lose weight or get ripped. And that's the antithesis of what they should be looking at in terms of working out and being well. It's how you feel the day of your exercising, how you feel after or during even. And the University of Michigan has looked at this for 20 years. What keeps us coming back? What keeps us motivated to follow the exercise program? Well, it's really being aware of how important it is to the way you feel, the way you act, the way you interact after you've exercised. And that is what's key and what's important, not the scale, not the way you look. All that is a good side effect. I say, and what I have come to say is that we really move and exercise to keep our brains working optimally. And the effect on the body is just a welcome side effect.
So you, through connecting with you, I've also connected with the kids of the teacher out in Naperville, Illinois. And I have hopefully an interview coming up with one of the sons of the teacher who's connected to you. So I'm looking forward to that. Maybe you could tell us about Spark. And my favorite quote of yours in Spark is, grab your gym bag, not your remote. Maybe you could tell us about the genesis. Did you find out about the Naperville middle school program before you got the idea to write Spark, or did that come together while you were writing Spark?
No, that was definitely the beginning of. Here's what happened in the year 2001. I think there was or maybe 2002. There was a frontline program looking at obesity, the obesity crisis in America, and looking at the schools. And they had on Phil Lawler, who was the head PE teacher who I talk about a lot in Spark in the first chapter when I'm talking about Naperville. He's a revolutionary that changed the whole program at Naperville. First in his junior high school or middle school unit, because he was head of PE there. And then that spread to the others, and then it spread to the high schools, and then you were encompassing 19,000 kids who followed his program, which was all about keeping kids moving and learn to enjoy moving as well, not just getting their heart rate up and all that, although that was the beginning, putting the heart rate monitors on the kids while they were exercising was brilliant, because what he was able to do is say, okay, you're going to get your grade based on the time spent in your cardiac training zone. And this meant that the kids that were out of shape and that were, discoordinated, that they could get good grades by going after it, by just trying, by just moving. And eventually, of course, they got better and better. But this frustrated a lot of athletes, by the way, whose heart rates were hard to get up to that level. But yet they had to push themselves and to get their usual A that they got prior to sort of switching this the grading. And I hear from parents today, like their soccer jock kids who does martial arts, who does marathoning all in one. They can't get an A in class because they're using the measure of being in the cardiac training zone. Well, their cardiac is trained really well, and so to get to the level where they're pressing themselves is very difficult, and so it's been interesting. But aside from that, this really revolutionized the school to really focus on every kid being involved in making themselves healthier. And it's not just about cardiac and heart rate. It's about moving. It's about getting your body moving enough, and that's how heart rate goes up. That's why it's a great measure of your body's movement.
So Naperville, outside of Chicago, they instituted that program thanks to Phil Lawler, and their grades went up. I don't know what happened. If you mentioned that, I can't remember, about behavior in school and less referrals to the principal, but I'm sure that went down. Less referrals and less behavioral problems. And then there was a news story, and then it just kept growing. And then you wrote Spark, which was a bestseller. I think you had 4,000 something testimonials on Amazon, or some huge number I saw. And so this whole thing grew, and now you've got Korea and other countries and other municipalities around the world that want to tap into this knowledge and this program.
Oh yeah, no, when people read the book, they think it's all about Naperville, and it is in a way. It would be great if schools followed that. But I've been blessed with Spark. I travel everywhere. I became friends with the president of Taiwan. He was the first in Asia to sort of embrace Spark because he read it right when it came out, because he's a triathlete and he was a Harvard Law School graduate. So there was a little connection there. And so I went over there almost right away and spoke at 11 different places and 11 different universities. And he interviewed me on Taiwanese TV. we went on a 3K run early Sunday morning at 6:30 a.m. with 7,500 Taiwanese people. We got to know each other, and he had got all of his boys, if you will, boys and girls, to set up all kinds of programs, including an East Asia conference on Spark. So we had all these different countries come with their professors, 800 of them, with professors from around the world who were experts in the area of exercise and its effect on our brains come, and it was very popular. And so they wanted to do it the next year, but it happened to be at the time that I was getting married to my wife in 2009, 2010. I'm not sure. Yeah, 2011 maybe it was. So, and I said, well, I can't because I'm getting married that day. And he said, well, why don't you come here and have the wedding here?
Wow.
So they set up a wedding in Mulai, town up in the mountains, which was Aboriginal. And so we had an Aboriginal ceremony for our first wedding with just a glorious celebration. It was on Taiwanese TV and all this stuff. So, but he instituted in Taiwan to try and mirror what was happening in Naperville. So he added 1 extra hour a week. They were already fairly active students, but an extra hour a week for every student of physical activity or sport. And this was throughout the land. And so then other Asian countries heard about it. And that's how I became had a very big presence, a very big footprint in Asia. First in Japan, then in mainland China, in Singapore, and now in Korea. Always at sort of the highest level. I'm going back to Korea, and I'm going to be meeting the current Minister of Education again. And I met him years ago when he another president had him as Minister of Education, and now he's been out of that for a while, but now he's back. And so I'm going to go over and we're going to meet again. But because they want to adopt the principles of getting the kids moving and keeping them moving to make education better.
Wonderful story. It's amazing that people might take a look at what's going on in your life, but the whole trajectory of this book, it seems to have a spark, just like the spark of people getting fit and learning about the connection between neurology and improving our focus and all these wonderful things that come with physical movement. The story of how you got the following is another version of a spark.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful, and I'm so grateful for it, and and feel very responsible to the world to bring the message out there, because people are so needing it and wanting it.
We can get close to winding down. I was going to ask you if you had a moment, could you share a little bit about the ANP and BDNF and brain volume in older adults, capillaries, some of that brain chemistry and functionality and memory stuff that comes out in the book Spark?
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing to take away that most people haven't heard of, it's BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that was really, along with Naperville, that's what turned me on to exercise. Because in the mid '90s we learned, well, in the mid '80s we learned about BDNF, but in the '90s we learned that exercise was a great way to increase our BDNF, which I called Miracle-Gro for the brain. And this is before Spark, and I was talking about this at various conferences and whatnot, that exercise promoted our brains to be better at learning. And that's what BDNF does. It makes our brain more neuroplastic. Exercise makes our brain more able to change. That's the neuroplasticity. And the way we learn anything is for our brains to grow in the information. That is to change the presynaptic and the postsynaptic side to make the connection stronger. And that's how we encode our whatever it is we're going to remember. So this became a focal point for me to get people to appreciate how exercise can do this. And it's basically like this. The more we use our brain cells, the more BDNF we have, and the more BDNF we make. And this then leads to a very plastic brain, which is really what we want.
And then you mentioned new capillaries in the brain based on studies of a contemporary of yours who was able to put, I don't know how he did that. Was that a microscopic camera or how? I don't know how he did that.
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but there's a lot of evidence that what we do when we move, we're stressing the body and the brain. I mean, it's stress, right? But it's good stress because it ends. Unless you're an ultra marathoner, which are crazy people, but you have a break and you have time for recovery. And when you stress the muscle, you break muscle fibers, and then you release all these good things just to sort of repair and regrow. And that's how you build your muscles. But at the same time, these growth factors in your body go up to your brain and have an effect there, especially on learning and memory and growing our brain cells. So this is where we release the endorphins and the endocannabinoids, but also one of the substances is VEGF, and this is vascular growth factor. So this grows more capillaries, grows more conduits for carrying our blood to various places that are needing it, like your muscle that you've damaged when you've exercised. So it promotes more growth.
So use it or lose it, but it's not from being a mad scientist in a lab. That's not enough to enhance your brain activity. You have to do physical movement, maybe some relaxation. You have to oxygenate the brain. I don't know if you talk about that in some of your books, the relationship between breathing and brain functionality and development.
Yeah, no, it all that is grist for the mill, as it were. I mean, I didn't focus on breathing. That sort of comes later for me. So the working with a bunch of different wellness groups throughout who use Wim Hof and other breathing experts to help further the wellness path. And I love it, but it's not in my books.
Neurogenesis, I wrote down in my notes from your book, and I guess that means more brain cells being manufactured.
Yeah. We got the definitive word on that in 1999. We had sort of suspected it. We saw it in animals in the 1990s, especially in birds who had a need to come up with new songs every year, and seeing their brains grow differently. They grew more cells for more songs, different songs. And so we imagined or hypothesized that we were growing more brain cells, and especially in the area of the brain, the hippocampus, that's involved with memory and learning. And in fact, that's true. We grow new brain cells every day by using our brains. And the more we use it, the more brain cells we're going to grow. And especially in the memory and learning area of the brain. Because we do have these these stem cells, pluripotent cells that can be changed into anything, that hang out near our hippocampus. And when and they're activated every day, some of them, but with exercise, we activate many more to turn into real new nerve cells. And this was a revolution, by the way. This was the hard-nosed other neuroscientists took 10 years for them to agree to it. And even though they saw the evidence, the evidence was there, but they would find a way to discount the evidence or see it as being different. I love this quote by one of the great American philosophers. I wouldn't have seen it if I didn't believe it. Now think about that. If you have to have the belief to be able to see what's in front of you, or else you won't be able to construct it. And that of course was Yogi Berra, who said such a wild thing, but it's really true. And so these hard-edged other neuroscientists who were devoted to what they had produced and what they believed and what their lives were based on, essentially their professional lives, had a hard time saying that we can make new brain cells. But now it's just part of the current wisdom. And exercise promotes it more than anything, because you're using more brain cells when you exercise than in any other human activity. It's as simple as that. And when you use more brain cells, you're gonna develop more neurotransmitter, more neurohormones, more growth factors, and you're going to promote growth.
Are you connected, John, to any colleagues, contemporaries who are experts on Freud?
On Freud? I grew up on Freud. I know. I grew up on Freud.
Okay.
No, I grew up I was in psychoanalysis for 14 years myself. So I grew up as that's what we learned. That was like the running on a treadmill for us, similar.
So I've been living in Vienna for about 4 of the last 5 summers. And so I've been exposed to where Freud was and some of the Freud sociology. Not much on I haven't read his books, but I would like to. But I have some thoughts on his own personal lifestyle, and I haven't run it by somebody who knows a little bit about Freud, but I don't want to do it now. But if you're open to it, there are more things I would love to ask you. I don't want to take up your time in an unpleasant way for you, but if you're open to a further conversation, I would love to have one on where we touch on some of the things I've come up with on Freud and see what you think, and then also some other things that relate to the mind-body connection in some of your other books, if you're at all open to it.
Sure, that would be fun. Yeah, that would be good. I enjoyed our conversation. I enjoyed meeting you. I'm going to get your book.
Sed-
sedentary nation.
Sedentary Nation. Yeah, and the other book that I wrote, well, there are two in that same field. It's the first one's called The Aging Athlete, and the follow-up book is called How to Raise Child Athletes. And so what I found is that athletes, when they leave their high performance sports, and I've interviewed up to almost 2,000 high performance athletes, and that includes industrial athletes, so people who work in construction and ballet dancers, anyone performing or using their body for their job, or athletes. And I've determined through my anecdotal study that 90% of them are sedentary for the rest of their lives, mostly sedentary in terms of not having any program of maintenance. And that starts the day or the week they leave their high performance activity. So I'm hoping that there's a postdoc or a doctoral student and a research team that can help me with that and put together a scientific study, which would, of course, be more accepted by the market than my 2,000 interviews, and work with us. But the other thing that makes my study closer to the anecdotal more of a scientific is that I've asked those 2,000 people about the 10 people they still keep in contact with, and let's go through them, and you can tell me if they're mostly sedentary or where they are in that. And the answer is the same. So that takes 2,000 and it puts it at 20,000. So that's a lot of people I'm drawing from in that to get those statistics that I've determined. What should I do with all that stuff?
Oh, yeah, no, you got to get a couple postdocs on it, and you should be able to, especially within our AI world that we're living in. They'd be able to sift through the information you have and tell you what to look for and how you can look for it. We have great tools these days. Great tools.
So I'll send you a video I put together about my reach out for someone to do a scientific study. And I don't know if there's a place you'd suggest we could post that, or how I can offer that to a postdoctoral or doctoral people that helps the doctoral students determine what direction they can take with their interests and their research programs. But I think that's one that I have since 2008 been working so deeply in, and I haven't seen it touched on. I don't follow it daily, but I follow it somewhat closely, and I haven't seen that study that's been done. It may be out there, but I just haven't seen it.
Not aware of it. Not aware of such a study. So it sounds like it's something to really go after.
Fantastic, John. So I hope you have a wonderful day in Hawaii, and your website is johnratey.com.
Right.
So, and then your books are on Amazon and other sources, and they're in every format we could ask for. There's Kindle, there's audio, there's hardcover, softcover, anything we want, we can find that. And I'm Sifu Slim at sifuslim.com, and I'm very blessed and happy to have spent time with Dr. John Ratey today. And this is something that's going to propel me further in my own wellness program and in my reach out and dispensation of the things that I've learned to the book reading market and the YouTube viewing market.
Great. Well, it's been fun getting to know you a little bit and sharing the time with you. So good luck, and hopefully we'll meet again.
Thanks, John. And for the folks viewing, please like and subscribe, and leave your comments below, and we'll see if we can respond to anything that you have a question about. Big aloha.
Mahola.